there are various threat scenarios that your organization may face, and you use those threat scenarios to define the controls you need to put in place, the security controls you put in place to mitigate the impact from that. So look through a laundry list of your various threat scenarios where something like your primary office is unusable due to a fire, a flood, equipment failure, denial of service, data breach, compromise of information, staff unavailable to work because of illness or something else. Look at all these potential threat scenarios and then start to think about how do I limit the impact of these threat scenarios on our business? What would I do? How do I reduce or eliminate the vulnerabilities, that I find as part of these threat scenarios? How do I prevent bad stuff from happening, turning into a big impact? How you do that is through security controls. And these security controls are things that you put in place on your network, within your organization, to mitigate or reduce the impact of a bad event. How you go about selecting those security controls, well, there are a couple different influences that you might think through before you just arbitrarily start picking security controls and implementing them through your organization. You might look at the data types that you're trying to protect. Are these critical data? Is this critical data? Is it not important public data? You might want to look at the overall impact level of the system. If the system goes down, is this a bad thing, a really bad thing, or a catastrophic thing? And then what you'll probably want to think through is how do I tailor this so that the controls fit my environment and help me really mitigate the risk of what I'm trying to address with my threat scenarios. One approach, this is kind of a broad-based approach, is define a minimum security baseline, or MSB. These are all defined in the NIST 800 Special Pub Series. But what you could do is say, all right, well, I don't want to go through the control by control level to figure out what I need to do. Just give me a package of controls. And these become what could be considered a minimum security baseline. So it packages up the controls and allows you to implement those as a group across all of your systems and achieve some level of consistent security or compliance across everything that you have. A minimum security baseline should not be considered to be very specific. You really should go through and augment the controls that the minimum baseline recommends to you and tailor those to your particular systems or technology. But if nothing else, in your limited time, limited resources, you just want to say, give me a package of controls that I can implement, the minimum security baseline is probably a good place to start. So how do you select these baseline controls? Well, several different ways of doing it, but really what it comes down to is make sure that it addresses the risk that you need it to address. You can use various guidelines like the ISO 27000 series. You can use the NIST Special Pub series. DoD has some guidance in the 8500 series. And then payment card industry also has a set of controls that you can look at as well. If that's not enough, you can turn to the regulatory requirements that you might be subject to, like HIPAA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, FISMA, all of those sort of things, and even FFIEC, to say, here are the extra set of controls that I need as a starting baseline. So lots of different places you can go for control guidance. Just recognize that whatever controls you do put in place really should be based on what risk you're trying to address. There are 2 special pubs out there produced by NIST that provide some type of guidance for you on how to select what controls you need. The first is the FIPS 200, which defines the minimum security requirements for federal information and information systems. These get into, it's really a high-level document, but it gets into the minimum security requirements and proposes a risk-based approach to selecting controls to address that risk. Even if you're not a federal agency, FIPS 200 provides some really good guidance for you in terms of selecting controls. The next one, and probably what I would consider the definitive list of controls, is NIST Special Pub 800-53. These are a set of recommended security controls for federal information system and organizations. Again, even if you're not a federal organization, these can provide you some good controls that you might want to consider. And it's a very comprehensive document. It's several hundred pages thick, provides very, very into detail goes into very much detail on each of the controls and tailoring those controls to your specific situation. Back to FIPS 200, again, it's a pretty short document. It tries to set out the security control areas, the security control families that are out there, and it proposes a process for determining what's called the high water mark for a system. So what you do is look at, across the board, you look at what's the impact of this system, what's the value of the information on this, and you try to determine, well, am I a high impact, moderate impact, or low impact system? And based on that, I can select a set of the minimum security baseline controls and use those. So if you look through Annex 1, Annex 2, and Annex 3 of this document, you've got each of those annexes in 853 will define at this level, or at this baseline level, what controls do I need to implement. And based on that, then you can go through and say, all right, I've got a standard list I'm working with, and I need to do this control, this control. I don't have to implement this one. I need to tailor this one. But it gives you a good starting point for implementing security controls. The security control structure that you'll see in 853 if you open up the document, there are several sections in there for each control. The control section tells you about the control itself, supplemental guidance, so how to implement that control, control enhancements. These are guidance or tips for making that control better at the cost of more resources to implement it. References section, so any particular references related to that control you'll see there. And then each control also has a priority and a baseline allocation assignment to it. So for each control in 853, you'll see a set of information that goes through everything from what is it down to when should I implement it and under what circumstances should I implement it. The control section is a statement of the control itself and what capabilities needed to protect that information system. The supplemental guidance provides information related to the security control, but not necessarily any requirements. So this might just be extra information. You don't have to consider it when you implement the control because it's not required, but it's there for your reference only. The control enhancements section provides extra capabilities or enhancements to the original control. So if you need to make the control stronger, increase the strength of it, or add additional functionality to it, you can do that. Again, that's going to be at the cost of implementation or other downstream effects. But it does provide it there for you so that if you need to make that control stronger because whatever environment you're in or whatever your requirements are, you can certainly do that. The references section, this gives you a list of federal laws, executive orders, directives, any other type of guidance related to this control or references will be put in here as well. And then the last one there, the priority and baseline allocation section. This tells you, from a priority perspective, if you have multiple controls, let's say you have 200 controls that you want to implement, the priority will tell you, okay, implement these first, these second, and then these third. So you'll get priority 1, 2, and 3 there as well. And then the baseline allocation, this tells you if you are a low impact, medium impact, or high impact information system, that high watermark that we talked about. This will tell you, is this control part of the low baseline, the medium baseline, or the high impact baseline? And again, a comment on the prioritization, just recognize that it's going to be P1 through P3, which is the order in which you implement it could be first, next, or last. So again, with a list of 200 controls, which ones would you implement first? Look in 800-53, pull up the ones that are listed as P1. Those will be the ones that you implement. This is an actual excerpt from 853. So this is the control section up here that we have highlighted in red. And you can see that it just talks about the control itself. And here we're talking about AU5. I should mention down here also that you can see that each of these controls, these are the baselines. So high baseline, moderate baseline, low baseline. And notice that this control, AU5, is selected for implementation at each of these baselines. So if you've opted for the package approach to implementing security controls, regardless of whether you're a low, moderate, or high impact package of controls, you're going to be putting in place AU5. This is the control enhancement section. Again, this is the part that talks about extra strength for the control. And you can see that there are 4 options for you as part of this particular control. You can implement 1, 2, 3, or 4, all of them, or part of them, based on what you need to do or what risk you're trying to address. If you're part of the high security baseline, NIST actually recommends that you implement the control itself and enhancements 1 and 2. And so if you were the high baseline, you'd implement the control plus these 2 extra strength features as part of that. And the last point here is on the priority code. So down there in the bottom left, you can see that this is marked as P1, priority 1. So again, out of all the controls that you have to implement, this would be one of the first ones that you implement, or one of the first ones you should implement. And then at the minimum security baselines, again, that package approach, this is a cutout from also from 853 that shows you what controls should be implemented at each baseline. So here, if you are the low baseline, you're going to implement AC1, AC2, AC3. These are not selected, meaning if you're operating a system at the low security baseline, you don't have to implement these controls, the ones that list not selected. But you can see as you move from low to moderate to high, more of the controls get selected for implementation, and you have additional control enhancements as well as you move up from a low to moderate to high security baseline. So this is a good reference chart for saying, all right, I'm at a low security baseline. What controls do I need to implement? Just look at the table here and it will tell you exactly what you need to implement. We already mentioned the enhancements. Again, just note that a key difference between low, moderate, and high here, low, there are no control enhancements for AC2. But if you're at the moderate or high level, you actually have all 4 control enhancements you need to implement. And here are the priorities. So again, you can see that P1 through P3. The only thing to note here is there's an entry for P0. Why is this a priority 0? Well, if you look across the chart here, it says not selected, not selected, not selected for AC9. What that means is P0 is don't implement. And it's because at each column here, low, moderate, and high, that control isn't selected for implementation. And that's why you end up with a priority of 0, P0.